A Hell's Angel helps an elderly woman who has fainted, and what happens next changes their lives forever. The afternoon sun, low and casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt, did little to soften the harsh edges of the city. It was a typical Tuesday in late autumn, the kind where a crisp bite in the air hinted at the colder months to come, but the midday warmth still clung stubbornly to the brick facades. Traffic hummed with its usual monotonous rhythm, a symphony of internal combustion engines, distant sirens, and the occasional blare of a frustrated horn. Pedestrians, bundled in various layers, hurried along the cracked pavements, their gazes fixed on some unseen destination, lost in the self-contained worlds of their daily routines. Amidst this mundane urban tapestry, a figure emerged that, by all accounts, was anything but ordinary. His name was Rex, though few dared to call him anything but Chief. A moniker earned through years of unwavering loyalty, an unyielding presence, and a leadership that, while sometimes brutal, was undeniably effective within the strict hierarchy of his motorcycle club. Today, Chief was on his way back from a meeting, a particularly grueling session that had left him with a familiar knot of tension in his shoulders and a simmering impatience that only the open road could truly dissipate. His ride, a meticulously maintained Harley-Davidson, rumbled beneath him, a beast of polished chrome and dark, unforgiving steel. Its custom pipes exhaled a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the very ground, announcing his approach long before he was visible. Chief was a man who commanded attention, whether he sought it or not. His frame was broad, muscular, honed by years of physical labor and a life lived on the edge. A thick, grizzled beard, streaked with gray, framed a face etched with experience, a roadmap of past battles and silent struggles. His eyes, though often hidden behind the dark lenses of his sunglasses, held a piercing intensity that could silence a room with a single glance. Today, however, they were uncovered, revealing a weariness that belied his formidable exterior. He wore the quintessential uniform of his brotherhood, a heavy leather vest, adorned with patches that told a story of initiation, loyalty, and territory. The infamous Death's Head patch, the snarling winged skull, was emblazoned proudly on his back, a universal symbol of the Hell's Angels, recognized and often feared across continents. Faded denim jeans, scuffed leather boots, and a bandana tied loosely around his head completed the ensemble, an aesthetic that had remained largely unchanged for decades, a testament to a lifestyle fiercely resistant to the fleeting whims of fashion. As he navigated the busy intersection, his gaze, usually scanning for potential threats or opportunities, was momentarily drawn to a small, independent grocery store on the corner. It was one of those old-fashioned establishments, its windows displaying pyramids of fresh produce and shelves overflowing with local goods, a stark contrast to the sterile uniformity of the larger supermarket chains. Something about its quaint charm always caught his eye, a brief flicker of nostalgia in an otherwise hard-edged existence. He slowed his bike slightly, the engine's roar dropping to a deep purr, allowing a line of pedestrians to cross before him. It was then that he saw her. An elderly woman, frail and stooped, was making her way out of the grocery store. She clutched a worn canvas bag to her chest, brimming with what appeared to be a few modest purchases. Her coat, a faded tweed, hung loosely on her small frame, and a patterned scarf was tied neatly around her head, though a few wisps of silver hair had escaped its confines. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each step seemingly an effort. Her face, a delicate network of wrinkles, held an expression of quiet determination, but also a hint of exhaustion. She reminded him, fleetingly, of his own grandmother, a memory that surfaced rarely and always brought with it a pang of something akin to regret. He watched as she paused on the top step, her hand reaching out for the metal railing, a gesture of support that seemed suddenly urgent. The world around Chief continued its relentless pace. A city bus hissed to a stop, disgorging a handful of passengers. A delivery truck idled noisily, its exhaust fumes mingling with the scent of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe. But for Chief, time seemed to stretch and slow, focusing solely on the woman. He noticed the slight sway in her posture, the way her grip on the bag tightened, her knuckles turning white. Her eyes, magnified by thick-rimmed glasses, seemed to unfocus, darting aimlessly for a split second before her eyelids fluttered, a desperate attempt to maintain control. A collective gasp, barely audible above the urban din, rippled through the few onlookers who had also registered her sudden distress. Then, without warning, she crumpled. Her legs gave way beneath her, a sudden, terrifying collapse that sent her canvas bag tumbling to the pavement, its contents scattering across the grimy concrete. A small, ripe apple rolled precariously close to the curb, threatening to join the discarded cigarette butts and forgotten chewing gum. Her body hit the ground with a sickening thud, a sound that seemed amplified in the sudden, stunned silence that descended upon the immediate vicinity. She lay there, utterly still, a small, vulnerable heap against the backdrop of the bustling street, her face pale and slack. A few people hesitated, their initial shock turning into a confused murmuring. Some took a step forward, then stopped, unsure of what to do, their eyes darting nervously between the fallen woman and each other. The city, so often a place of anonymous indifference, seemed to hold its breath. No one immediately rushed to her aid. Perhaps it was the fear of liability, perhaps the ingrained reluctance to get involved, or simply a deer-in-headlights paralysis. Whatever the reason, the elderly woman remained unattended, a victim of circumstance and the chilling apathy that can sometimes grip a crowd. Chief's internal world, usually a fortress of controlled emotion, was momentarily breached. A flicker of something primal ignited within him, a stark contrast to the hardened exterior he presented to the world. He was not a man given to hesitation. His instincts, honed by a lifetime of making snap decisions in dangerous situations, kicked in with brutal efficiency. Without a second thought, without a word, he twisted the throttle. The Harley surged forward, a powerful, dark projectile aimed directly at the scene of the collapse. The sudden roar of his engine, cutting through the brief silence, startled the onlookers, causing them to jump back, their eyes widening in a mixture of fear and surprise as the imposing figure on the monstrous bike bore down on them. He brought the heavy machine to a skidding halt just inches from the scattered groceries, the front wheel almost touching the fallen apple. The engine idled loudly, a throbbing heartbeat against the sudden quiet. He swung his leg over the seat with practiced ease, his movements fluid and powerful despite the bulk of his leather attire. His gaze, now devoid of weariness, was sharp, assessing. He took in the woman, the scattered items, the hesitant crowd. A low growl, barely audible, escaped his lips, a guttural sound of disapproval aimed at the inaction around him. He knelt down beside the woman, his large, calloused hand surprisingly gentle as he reached for her wrist. His fingers, accustomed to gripping handlebars and wielding tools, felt for a pulse, a reassuring throb of life. The leather of his vest creaked as he bent, the faint scent of stale cigarette smoke and engine oil clinging to him. The contrast between his formidable appearance and the unexpected tenderness of his actions was jarring, a silent challenge to the preconceived notions held by those who watched, transfixed. A young woman, clutching her phone, had begun to dial, her thumb hovering over the last digit. A middle-aged man in a business suit had finally taken a step forward, his face a mask of concern. But it was Chief who was there, the first responder in this unexpected emergency. He carefully loosened the scarf around her neck, ensuring her airway was clear. He checked her eyes, gently lifting an eyelid to observe her pupils. They were dilated, but not alarmingly so. Her skin was cool to the touch, and a faint sheen of perspiration covered her forehead. He spoke in a low, rumbling voice, a sound that, despite its inherent power, was surprisingly soft, almost soothing. "Ma'am? Can you hear me? You've taken a bit of a tumble." His words, though directed at her, seemed to carry an unspoken command to the silent crowd, urging them to observe, to learn, perhaps even to feel a flicker of shame for their earlier inaction. He gently placed a hand on her cheek, a gesture of human connection that transcended the chasm of their vastly different worlds. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes, a cloudy blue, blinked several times, struggling to focus. She looked up, her gaze hazy, and her brow furrowed in confusion. Her eyes, still adjusting, widened slightly as they registered the imposing figure leaning over her, the dark leather, the grizzled beard, the glint of a skull ring on one of his fingers. For a moment, a flicker of something akin to fear crossed her features, a natural reaction to such an unexpected and unconventional presence. But then, as her mind slowly pieced together the fragments of her surroundings, and perhaps as she registered the unexpected kindness in his stern eyes, the fear began to recede, replaced by a profound bewilderment. What happened?" she whispered, her voice a reedy rasp, barely audible. Her hand instinctively reached up, a trembling, fragile gesture, as if to touch his face, but then hesitated, falling back to the pavement. Chief offered a reassuring, if gruff, smile. It was an unpracticed expression, one that rarely graced his features, causing a ripple of surprise among the onlookers. "You fainted, ma'am. Hit your head a little, but nothing serious, far as I can tell. Just need to get you sitting up." He spoke with an authority that brooked no argument, yet infused with an unexpected gentleness. He shifted his position, carefully sliding one arm beneath her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. His movements were deliberate, mindful of her fragility. With a strength that seemed effortless, he began to lift her, slowly, carefully, guiding her into a sitting position against the cool, brick wall of the grocery store. Her head lolled for a moment, then settled against the rough surface. He retrieved her scattered groceries, gathering the apple, a loaf of bread, and a carton of milk, placing them gently back into her canvas bag. The small act of retrieval, so mundane, felt profoundly significant in the context of the moment. He then knelt before her, his large frame dwarfing her small one, his eyes still fixed on her, assessing, ensuring she was truly all right. The city's hum began to reassert itself, but the small pocket of space around them remained charged with an unusual quiet, a testament to the unexpected drama that had unfolded. He reached into the inner pocket of his vest, pulling out a small, crumpled water bottle. "Here," he said, his voice softer now, "take a sip." Slowly. He uncapped it for her, holding it to her lips with the same surprising tenderness. She took a small, tentative sip, her eyes still wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding, fixed upon the Hell's Angel who had, against all expectations, become her unlikely savior. She took another tentative sip, her gaze rising from the water bottle to Chief's face, a complex mixture of fear and wonder in her cloudy blue eyes. The water seemed to bring a little color back to her cheeks, and her breathing, though still shallow, became more even. The initial shock of her collapse was slowly giving way to a more lucid awareness of her surroundings, and more importantly, of the imposing figure kneeling before her. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still thin, but gaining a fraction of its former strength. I don't know what happened." She pressed a hand to her forehead, a slight frown creasing her brow. "One moment I was walking, the next," her voice trailed off, a shiver running through her small frame. Chief nodded, his expression softening imperceptibly. "You passed out, ma'am. Took a bit of a spill." He watched her closely, his eyes missing nothing, assessing her recovery with an almost clinical detachment that belied the unexpected warmth of his earlier actions. He had seen men fall harder in bar brawls and bike accidents, but this was different. This was fragility, vulnerability, something he rarely encountered, and even more rarely felt compelled to address. His world was built on strength, on self-reliance, on a brutal code that left little room for weakness. Yet, here he was, tending to an old woman on a busy street corner, an act that, if his brothers saw, would undoubtedly lead to a barrage of jokes, or worse, questions about his commitment to their hardened image. The thought brought a familiar tightening in his gut, a conflict between the man he was expected to be and the man he found himself being in this moment. The crowd, which had initially been frozen in a tableau of shock and indecision, now began to stir. A few onlookers, emboldened by Chief's decisive action and the woman's apparent recovery, started to approach. The young woman with the phone, her call to emergency services now connected, spoke in hushed tones, describing the situation. The businessman, still looking concerned, took another hesitant step forward. A couple of other passers-by, their curiosity piqued, began to form a loose semicircle around them, whispers circulating through the growing throng. Chief registered their approach, his senses always alert to potential threats. His eyes, though focused on the woman, flickered momentarily to the encroaching figures. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a warning sign to anyone who might think of interfering. He wasn't about to let this turn into a circus, nor was he about to relinquish his care of the woman to a group of well-meaning but ultimately passive bystanders. He had taken charge, and he would see it through. "Are you feeling lightheaded still?" he asked the woman, ignoring the murmuring crowd. His voice was firm, drawing her attention back to him, subtly asserting his control over the immediate situation. She shook her head slowly. No, not so much now. Just a bit shaky. She tried to push herself further up against the wall, but a tremor ran through her arm. My legs feel like jelly. Stay put, Chief commanded gently, his hand reaching out to steady her. No need to rush it. He glanced around again, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the crowd. He caught the eye of the young woman on the phone. Did you call an ambulance? He asked, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the street with unexpected clarity. The young woman jumped slightly, startled by his direct address. Yes, sir. They said they're on their way. Should be here in a few minutes. Chief grunted, a sound of acknowledgement. Good. He turned his attention back to the elderly woman, whose eyes were now scanning the faces in the crowd, a faint blush rising on her withered cheeks. The sudden attention, the spectacle of her collapse, was clearly an embarrassment to her. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible, to cause such a fuss. Chief looked at her, a flicker of something akin to sympathy in his eyes. Nothing to be sorry for, ma'am. Happens. Just glad someone was here. He didn't elaborate on who that someone was, but the implication hung heavy in the air. He knew, instinctively, that she was trying to regain some semblance of dignity, and he respected that. His world, for all its rough edges, understood pride. A faint siren wail began to pierce the urban din, growing steadily louder. Chief's jaw tightened. He disliked dealing with authority in any form, especially the kind that wore uniforms. It always meant questions, paperwork, and potential trouble. But he had committed to this, and he wouldn't abandon her now. They're coming, he informed her, his voice low. Just stay calm. They'll check you over. He reached for her canvas bag, which he had placed beside her, and pulled out the apple. Here, take a bite of this. Get some sugar in you. He offered it to her, a gesture that, coming from him, felt almost absurdly domestic. She looked at the apple, then at him, her eyes still wide. Oh, no, thank you. I don't think I could. Just a small bite, he insisted, his tone leaving little room for argument. He knew the importance of getting something into someone who had fainted, to stabilize their blood sugar. He had seen enough men go down from exhaustion or lack of food to know the drill. She hesitated, then with a trembling hand, took the apple. She took a tiny, tentative bite, the crunch echoing in the sudden silence of their immediate space. The ambulance, its sirens now screaming, pulled up to the curb, its flashing lights painting the street in alternating hues of red and blue. Two paramedics, a man and a woman, quickly emerged, their expressions professional and efficient as they assessed the scene. Their eyes, like everyone else's, immediately fixed on Chief, the hulking figure in leather kneeling beside the frail old woman, his monstrous Harley-Davidson idling nearby like a restless beast. What have we got here? The male paramedic asked, his voice calm but authoritative as he approached. His gaze lingered on Chief's patches, particularly the death's head, a clear flicker of recognition, and perhaps apprehension, in his eyes. Chief rose slowly, his large frame unfolding to its full, imposing height. He still dwarfed the paramedics. Elderly woman fainted. Hit her head a little, but seems okay now. Gave her some water, she took a bite of an apple. His voice was gruff, devoid of any of the unexpected softness he had shown the woman. He reverted to his default persona, the hardened biker, unyielding and direct. The female paramedic knelt beside the woman, taking out her blood pressure cuff and stethoscope. Ma'am, can you tell us your name? She asked gently. Edna, the woman whispered, her eyes still on Chief, as if seeking reassurance. Edna Mae Jenkins. Chief stood back, observing, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He felt the familiar pull of wanting to disappear, to leave the scene now that the professionals had arrived. His job was done. But something held him there. A sense of responsibility, perhaps, or a lingering concern for Edna. Or maybe, just maybe, an unfamiliar feeling of satisfaction from having helped someone who truly needed it, without expectation of reward or recognition. It was a feeling that sat uncomfortably within him, a foreign entity in the landscape of his usual emotions. The male paramedic, after a quick visual assessment of Edna, turned his attention back to Chief. "And you are," he began, his tone cautious. Chief's eyes narrowed slightly, a clear sign of his displeasure. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially by law enforcement or public services. "I'm the one who stopped to help when no one else would," he stated, his voice a low growl that carried an unmistakable edge of challenge. His gaze swept over the still-standing crowd, a silent accusation in his eyes. The paramedic, sensing the tension, quickly shifted his approach. "Understood. We appreciate your assistance, sir. Did you witness the fall? Was there any loss of consciousness, any other symptoms?" Chief recounted the event succinctly, his description devoid of emotion, a mere statement of facts. He noted the sudden collapse, the lack of immediate help, his own intervention. He omitted any mention of his internal conflict or the fleeting pang of regret when she reminded him of his grandmother. That was his business, not theirs. As the paramedics continued their assessment of Edna, taking her vitals and asking her a series of questions, a police cruiser pulled up behind the ambulance, its lights flashing. Two officers emerged, their presence adding another layer of officialdom to the scene. This was exactly what Chief had wanted to avoid. His life was complicated enough without unnecessary interactions with the law. He could feel the eyes of the officers on him, assessing his patches, his bike, his entire intimidating presence. He knew the drill. The assumptions, the suspicion, the immediate categorization. He stood his ground, deliberately not making eye contact, his gaze fixed on Edna. He wouldn't leave her until he was sure she was truly all right. This was his unexpected and self-imposed duty. One of the police officers, a burly man with a stern expression, approached Chief. "Everything okay here, sir? We got a call about a disturbance and an unconscious person." His hand instinctively hovered near his belt, a subtle but clear signal of alertness. Chief slowly turned to face the officer, his expression unreadable behind his grizzled beard. "Everything's under control, officer. An old woman fainted. Paramedics are with her now." His voice was calm, but the underlying tension was palpable. He knew this was an interrogation, however polite. "And you are," the officer pressed, his eyes scanning Chief's vest, lingering on the notorious patches. "Chief," he replied, his tone flat. He offered no further explanation, no last name, no affiliation. He knew they knew who he was, or at least what he represented. There was no point in pretending otherwise. The officer's jaw tightened. "Chief." "Right. Well, Chief, perhaps you could tell me what you were doing here. Were you involved in the incident?" "I was riding by," Chief stated, his voice a low rumble. "Saw her fall. No one else moved, so I did." He met the officer's gaze directly, an unspoken challenge in his eyes. "Is there a problem with helping someone in need?" The officer hesitated, clearly thrown off by Chief's directness and the unexpected nature of the situation. A Hell's Angel, the very embodiment of defiance and often illicit activity, acting as a good Samaritan. It didn't fit the narrative. "No problem with helping, of course," the officer stammered slightly, recovering his composure. "It's just, unusual circumstances." He gestured vaguely at Chief's attire and bike. "Sometimes, unusual circumstances call for unusual help," Chief retorted, a hint of dry sarcasm in his voice. He glanced over at Edna, who was now being carefully helped onto a stretcher by the paramedics. She looked up at him, her eyes still holding that mixture of confusion and gratitude. She offered him a weak, trembling smile, a silent thank you that resonated more deeply than any words. The female paramedic, overhearing the exchange, intervened. "The woman, Mrs. Jenkins, seems to have suffered a vasovagal syncope. Low blood pressure, likely exacerbated by dehydration and perhaps a skipped meal. She's stable now, but we're taking her to the hospital for observation, just to be safe." The officer nodded, his attention shifting. "All right. So, no foul play, no assault?" "None," Chief confirmed, his voice firm. "Just an old woman who needed a hand." He took a step towards the stretcher where Edna now lay, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over her. He reached out, gently placing her canvas bag, which he had been holding, onto the stretcher beside her. "Your groceries, ma'am." Edna's eyes welled up slightly. "Oh, thank you, young man. You've been so kind." She reached out a frail hand and, to the astonishment of everyone watching, gently patted Chief's large, leather-clad arm. The touch was feather-light, yet it seemed to reverberate through Chief, a physical manifestation of the unexpected connection that had formed between them. Chief simply grunted, a sound that could have been agreement, embarrassment, or simply an acknowledgement of her gratitude. He felt a strange warmth spread through him, a sensation he hadn't felt in years, perhaps decades. It was a feeling that directly contradicted the hardened image he cultivated, the persona he lived and breathed. This woman, this frail, elderly stranger, had seen something in him that few others were allowed to witness, let alone acknowledge. As the paramedics began to wheel the stretcher towards the ambulance, Chief found himself walking alongside it, his presence a stark contrast to the sterile medical environment. The police officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected turn of events. They had a Hell's Angel, a known figure in the outlaw motorcycle world, acting as a concerned escort for a fainting grandmother. It was a headline waiting to happen, or a procedural nightmare. "We'll need your full name for the report, sir," the stern officer called out, his voice a little less confident now, as Chief continued to move with the stretcher. Chief paused, turning his head slightly. He met the officer's gaze, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "Chief," he repeated, his voice firm, unwavering. "That's all you need to know for now." He didn't wait for a response, turning back to Edna. As they reached the open doors of the ambulance, Edna looked up at him again, her eyes still holding that deep well of gratitude. "Thank you, Chief," she said, her voice stronger now, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "You're a good man." The words hit Chief with the force of a physical blow. A good man. He, Chief, a Hell's Angel, leader of a notorious club, a man whose life was often on the wrong side of the law, whose hands had done things he rarely spoke of, being called a good man by an innocent, elderly woman. The irony was almost unbearable. It was a label he had never sought, never believed he deserved, and certainly never expected to hear. He watched as they loaded her into the ambulance, the doors closing with a soft thud, sealing her away from the chaos of the street. He stood there for a long moment, the scent of exhaust fumes, stale coffee, and the lingering sweetness of the scattered apples still in the air. The police officers approached him again, but before they could speak, Chief turned and walked purposefully towards his Harley. The engine, which had been idling, roared to life with a twist of the throttle, a defiant, guttural sound that sliced through the lingering tension. He swung his leg over the seat, his movements fluid and powerful, and without another glance at the officers or the lingering crowd, he pulled away from the curb, merging back into the relentless rhythm of city traffic. But something had shifted within him. The open road, usually his sanctuary, felt different. The familiar knot of tension in his shoulders was still there, but now it was accompanied by an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a sensation that both comforted and disturbed him. Edna's words, "You're a good man," echoed in his mind, a dissonant chord in the symphony of his life. He knew who he was, what he had done. Yet, her innocent pronouncement had planted a seed of doubt, a question he wasn't prepared to answer. What did it mean to be a good man? And what did it mean for him, a Hell's Angel, to suddenly care about the answer? The city lights blurred as he rode, the question following him like a shadow, a new conflict brewing beneath the hardened exterior of Chief. He had helped an elderly woman, but in doing so, he had inadvertently opened a door to parts of himself he thought long buried, parts that now demanded to be acknowledged, perhaps even to be reconciled with the life he had chosen. His journey had just become far more complicated than a simple ride home. The path ahead, once clear, was now shrouded in an unexpected fog of self-reflection and potential transformation, a dangerous proposition for a man like Chief. Chief rode, the roar of his Harley a familiar balm, but today it couldn't drown out the echoes of Edna Mae Jenkins' voice. "You're a good man." The words were a foreign melody, discordant yet persistent, challenging the very foundation of his identity. He was Chief, a Hell's Angel, a figure forged in steel and fire, whose life was a tapestry of loyalty, defiance, and hard-won battles. Goodness, in his world, was often perceived as a weakness, a vulnerability exploited by the naive. Yet, the warmth in his chest, that strange, unsettling sensation, lingered. It wasn't the heat of anger or the rush of adrenaline, it was something softer, profound. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the confusion in his mind. He had dismissed the police, ignored the gawking crowd, but he couldn't dismiss Edna. Her innocent gratitude had pierced through his hardened shell, planting a seed of self-reflection he hadn't known he possessed. What did it mean to be good? Was it simply an act, or a state of being? And if he was capable of such an act, what else was he capable of? The question gnawed at him, a relentless whisper in the back of his mind. He pulled into the club's compound, the familiar roar of other bikes, the scent of stale beer and exhaust, a comforting anchor. But even here, the sanctuary felt different. The weight of Edna's words clung to him, a silent passenger on his ride. He dismounted, the heavy leather creaking, his movements deliberate. A few brothers were gathered around a fire pit, mugs in hand, their laughter coarse and familiar. "Chief! Where you been, old man?" "Missing out on the good times," one called out, a grin on his face. Chief merely grunted in response, heading directly for the clubhouse. He knew the news would spread. The sight of him, a Hell's Angel, kneeling beside a frail old woman on a busy street, would be prime fodder for gossip, ridicule, perhaps even suspicion. He braced himself for the inevitable barbs. Later that evening, as he nursed a beer, the first jibes came. "Heard old Chief turned into a damn Boy Scout today," another brother, Hammer, chuckled, his voice laced with mock admiration. "Rescuing damsels in distress now, are we? What's next, knitting circles?" A ripple of laughter went through the room. Chief's eyes, usually quick to flash with irritation, remained impassive. He took a slow sip of his beer, letting the taunts wash over him. Then, his gaze, sharp and unwavering, settled on Hammer. "She fainted." No one else moved. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, but carried an unspoken challenge. The laughter died down, replaced by a tense silence. Chief rarely explained himself, and when he did, it was usually a warning. She was alone. Helpless. He paused, his eyes sweeping over the faces of his brothers. "We don't leave our own. Even if our own ain't wearing patches." There was a subtle shift in the room. Some nodded, understanding the inherent code of loyalty, even if applied unconventionally. Others looked uncomfortable, their earlier amusement fading. Chief wasn't asking for approval, he was stating a fact, a principle that, in his mind, extended beyond the strict confines of their brotherhood. The topic slowly changed, but the undercurrent lingered. Chief had stood his ground, not out of anger, but out of a quiet conviction. The incident wasn't forgotten, but it was understood, in Chief's own terms. The next day, the good man seed continued to sprout. Chief found himself restless, unable to focus on the usual club business. The image of Edna's frail hand on his arm, her grateful smile, replayed in his mind. He knew she was in the hospital. He knew he should leave it at that. But the thought of her, alone, perhaps with no one, stirred something within him he couldn't ignore. It was an unfamiliar sense of responsibility, a quiet pull that transcended the codes of his club. He needed to know she was all right. He needed to see her. It was a dangerous impulse, a deviation from the hardened path he had always walked. Visiting a hospital, inviting more scrutiny, more questions, was precisely what he avoided. Yet, the pull was undeniable. He found himself on his bike again, not heading for the open road, but towards the sterile, impersonal edifice of the city hospital. He parked his Harley in a spot usually reserved for staff, its chrome gleaming defiantly amidst the mundane cars. He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that held a mixture of apprehension and resolve. His leather vest, with the infamous death's head patch, felt heavier than usual. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale glow on the hushed corridors. Chief felt like an alien, his heavy boots echoing loudly on the polished floors. Nurses and visitors alike gave him a wide berth, their eyes darting nervously from his patches to his grizzled face. He approached the reception desk, where a young woman with wide, startled eyes looked up at him. Edna Mae Jenkins, he rumbled, his voice softer than usual, but still a formidable sound in the quiet space. What room? The nurse, after a moment of stunned silence, fumbled with her keyboard, her fingers trembling slightly. Room 312, third floor. She pointed vaguely down a corridor. Chief nodded, his gaze unwavering, then turned and walked towards the elevators, leaving a trail of nervous whispers in his wake. On the third floor, he found room 312. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door. What would he say? What did he even hope to achieve? He pushed the door open gently. Edna was sitting up in bed, a thin hospital gown draped over her small frame. Her silver hair was neatly combed, and she was looking out the window, a thoughtful expression on her face. She turned at the sound of the door, her cloudy blue eyes widening in surprise as she saw him. "Chief," she whispered, a faint smile spreading across her face. "You came." Chief felt an unexpected lump in his throat. He nodded, stepping further into the room, his presence filling the small space. "Just checking in, ma'am. Wanted to make sure you were all right." He pulled up a plastic chair, its flimsy appearance a stark contrast to his bulk, and sat down. Edna chuckled softly. "Oh, I'm fine, Chief. Just a little low on sugar," they said. "And a touch of dehydration. Nothing a good cup of tea and a biscuit won't fix." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a warmth that seemed to melt away his usual defenses. "You really are a good man, you know." Chief grunted, a familiar response, but this time, it felt different. Less a deflection, more a reluctant acceptance. They talked. Or rather, Edna talked, and Chief listened. She told him about her life, a quiet existence filled with simple pleasures, gardening, reading, her weekly trip to the grocery store. She had no immediate family, her husband having passed years ago, and her only son living overseas, rarely in touch. Chief found himself unexpectedly captivated by her stories, a stark contrast to the brutal narratives of his own life. He discovered a profound wisdom in her simple observations, a resilience forged not in violence, but in quiet endurance. He visited her every day of her hospital stay, bringing her flowers, a new book, even a fresh apple from the grocery store where they had met. The nurses, initially wary, grew accustomed to his imposing presence, some even offering a tentative smile. He became Edna's chief, a silent guardian in the sterile hallways. When it was time for Edna to be discharged, Chief was there, not on his Harley, but in a neutral car, a loaner from a sympathetic brother who understood, without needing words, that Chief had business he couldn't conduct on his bike. He drove her home, to her small, tidy house, filled with old photographs and the scent of lavender. He helped her carry in her few belongings, ensuring she was settled. "Chief," she said, as he prepared to leave, "what will you do now?" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "I don't know, Edna," he admitted, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "Something's changed." And it had. The seed Edna had planted had blossomed into a profound reevaluation of his life. He couldn't shake the feeling of purpose he had found in helping her, a satisfaction that far outweighed the transient thrills of his former life. He began spending more time at Edna's, helping with chores, fixing things around her house, even planting a small garden for her, carefully following her instructions. He still rode his Harley, still met with his brothers, but his priorities had shifted. He gradually distanced himself from the more illicit aspects of the club, focusing instead on the camaraderie, the brotherhood, but on his own terms. His brothers, initially bewildered, slowly came to accept this new facet of Chief. Some even joked about Chief's new girlfriend, but the respect for his unwavering loyalty remained. He wasn't abandoning them, he was simply expanding his world. The police, who had kept a watchful eye on him, eventually eased their surveillance, recognizing a genuine shift in his behavior, a Hell's Angel who seemed to prefer tending a garden to causing trouble. Edna became his confidant, his quiet anchor. She never preached, never judged, simply listened. Through her, Chief began to understand that goodness wasn't a weakness, but a strength, a different kind of power. It was the power to connect, to care, to make a tangible difference in a single, vulnerable life. He realized that the good man Edna saw wasn't a separate entity, but a part of him that had always been there, buried deep beneath layers of rebellion and self-preservation. He had simply needed someone to unearth it. His life as a Hell's Angel continued, but it was recontextualized. He used his influence within the club not for aggression, but for stability, for mediating disputes, for ensuring the welfare of his brothers, subtly steering them away from unnecessary conflict. He still wore his patches, still commanded respect, but now, there was an added dimension to his authority, a quiet dignity that transcended fear. He learned to reconcile the two parts of himself, the formidable chief, leader of men, and the unexpected good Samaritan, guardian of an elderly woman. They weren't mutually exclusive. They were simply different facets of a complex man. The afternoon sun, low and casting long shadows, once again found Chief. But this time, he wasn't riding away from a grueling meeting. He was sitting on Edna's porch, a mug of tea in his large, calloused hands, listening to her recount a story from her youth. The roar of his Harley was a distant memory, replaced by the gentle hum of conversation and the chirping of birds in Edna's newly tended garden. The knot of tension in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment. His life had indeed changed forever. It wasn't a dramatic transformation into a saint, but a profound internal shift, a recognition of a different kind of strength. He was still Chief, a Hell's Angel, but now, unequivocally, he was also a good man. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt truly at peace. The path ahead was no longer shrouded in fog, it was clear, illuminated by the unexpected kindness that had changed two lives, forging an unbreakable bond in the most improbable of circumstances. He had helped an elderly woman who had fainted, and what happened next had not only changed their lives forever but had redefined what it meant to be Chief.